Welcome to Romance Tales by Mandy. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Now, sit back, relax, and let's begin.
The boardroom smelled like polished wood and fresh coffee, sharp, clean, professional. Just the way I liked it. My assistant, Ava, hovered beside me, her tablet in hand, a knowing glint in her eyes.
"This is it.
She murmured, sliding a thick contract toward me.
The biggest deal of your career."
I barely nodded, my pulse steady, my expression unreadable. Of course it was. This acquisition would catapult my company, Reynolds Capital, into a league of its own. A multi-billion-dollar deal that would seal my legacy. I reached for the contract, flipping through the pages with practiced ease, my mind already a step ahead, negotiation points, final clauses, potential pitfalls. Then I saw it. Nathan Caldwell, chief investor. The ink on the page blurred. The breath in my lungs locked tight. No. It couldn't be. I blinked, my fingers tightening around the edge of the document. A name. Just a name. But it wasn't just any name. Nathan. Memories slammed into me like a tidal wave, whispers against my skin, deep green eyes locking onto mine in the dark, promises murmured between stolen kisses. And then, nothing. Silence. Disappearance.
"Charlotte,
Ava's voice pulled me back, her brows knitting together.
something wrong?"
I inhaled sharply, forcing my mask back into place. No one would see me unravel. Not at all, I said, my voice as smooth as glass. Let's proceed. But inside, my mind was already spinning. Nathan Caldwell. The man who had once owned my heart. The man who had walked away. And now, the man who held the final key to my future.
The sound of my dress shoes echoed against the marble floors as I walked down the hallway, hands in my pockets, my mind already set on the deal ahead. This was routine, another meeting, another acquisition, another company looking to partner with Caldwell Investments. I'd done this 100 times before. But the second I stepped into the boardroom, the world around me shifted. Because sitting at the head of the long, glass conference table, poised, powerful, untouchable, was Charlotte Reynolds. I froze. For a split second, I wasn't in a boardroom anymore. I was in another time, another place. Sunlight catching in her blonde hair. Her laugh curling around my name. The way she'd once looked at me like I was the only man who had ever mattered. And then I remembered I wasn't supposed to see her again. Her gaze met mine, and fuck, it was like a punch to the gut. Those ice blue eyes, sharp as ever, barely flickered with recognition before she turned a page in the contract like I was just another name in a stack of paperwork. Professional. Detached. Unbothered. Right. Game on. I exhaled slowly, rolling my shoulders back, regaining control. If Charlotte wanted to act like I was nothing more than a business deal, fine. I'd play along. A smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth as I strode to my seat across from her, sliding into the chair with deliberate ease. "Well," I said, voice smooth as silk. "This is unexpected." Charlotte barely looked up.
Is it?
A challenge. My fingers tapped against the table as I studied her, noting every subtle detail, the slight tension in her jaw, the way her grip on the pen tightened just a fraction. She wasn't unaffected. I leaned back, my smirk deepening. "Didn't take you for the finance world, Reynolds. Last I checked, you had other interests." Her lips barely curved.
And last I checked, you weren't in the habit of keeping up with me.
Ouch. Ava, her assistant, cleared her throat.
"Shall we begin?"
Charlotte nodded, all business again, turning her attention to the documents between us. But as the meeting started, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't just another deal. This was her. And whether she wanted to acknowledge it or not, neither of us had ever truly let go.
Nathan's voice was like sandpaper against silk. Smooth, but rough enough to scrape old wounds. I kept my expression neutral, my fingers wrapped around the pen as I flipped through the contract, willing myself to focus. Numbers. Figures. Terms. Not him. But it was impossible. He was sitting right across from me, his presence as suffocating as it had always been. Towering, confident, the kind of man who could command a room without saying a single word. Damn him. I refused to look up. I refused to acknowledge the way my pulse had kicked up the second he walked through that door. Instead, I forced my voice to be cool, detached. We'll need to renegotiate Clause 14, I said, my gaze locked on the contract, not him. The equity split is unbalanced. Nathan let out a low chuckle.
You always did have a thing for balance, didn't you?
I gritted my teeth. Not rising to it. Not giving him the satisfaction. Ava, my assistant, cleared her throat and glanced between us.
Would you like me to make a note of that for revisions?
I nodded, pushing the pen across the paper with more force than necessary. Yes. Let's move on. But even as I spoke, my mind betrayed me, dragging me back to the last time I had seen Nathan Caldwell. 3 years ago. A Parisian hotel room. Rain streaking against the windows, the city glowing outside. My body wrapped in sheets, my skin still burning from the way he had worshipped me just hours before. And then, his voice. Low. Final.
I have to go.
What? I had sat up, my heart slamming against my ribs. Go where? Nathan hadn't looked at me. Not really. Just ran a hand through his messy black hair, pulling on his shirt like he was already 1,000 miles away.
It's complicated.
Complicated. I had waited for an explanation, for something, anything, but all I got was silence. And then, the sound of the door closing behind him. The memory hit me like a slap. I blinked, hard, dragging myself back to the present, where Nathan sat across from me, watching. Waiting. He knew. He fucking knew. I think that covers everything for today, I said abruptly, snapping the folder shut. Ava will follow up with the revised terms. I stood before he could say anything, before he could dig under my skin the way he always had. But as I turned to leave, his voice stopped me cold.
Charlotte.
Just my name. Nothing more. But it was enough to make my breath hitch. Enough to remind me that no matter how much time had passed, Nathan Caldwell still had the power to wreck me.
Charlotte Reynolds was an entirely different creature now. Gone was the woman who used to laugh freely, who used to look at me like I was something more than just another ruthless businessman. In her place sat a CEO, cold, polished, untouchable. And damn if that didn't make me want to touch her even more. I watched as she stood at the head of the conference table, rattling off financial projections like they were poetry, commanding the room with an effortless authority that made even the senior partners sit up and listen. She didn't just belong in this world. She ruled it. But I knew better than anyone power came at a cost. She wouldn't even look at me now. Not really. Not the way she used to. Back then, Charlotte had been fire and silk, sharp edges and soft whispers. She had loved fiercely, recklessly. Charlotte. Her name came out rougher than I intended, but I didn't care. She had already turned to leave, already put up that polished wall between us, and I wasn't having it. Not yet. She stilled. Just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Enough to know that, despite the mask she wore, I still got to her. She turned back to me slowly, her expression a perfect mask of indifference.
Yes?
I took my time stepping closer, measuring the space between us, watching the way she held her ground. A silent battle neither of us acknowledged but both felt. You've changed. She arched a brow.
That's what happens when people grow up.
I huffed a quiet laugh. Is that what this is? Growing up? Her eyes flickered, just for a heartbeat. Then she tilted her chin higher.
This meeting is over. I already said Ava would send the revised terms.
I caught it immediately. The way she'd repeated herself. Charlotte Reynolds never repeated herself unless something had rattled her. And I had rattled her. I took another step forward, keeping my voice low. Didn't used to be like this.
Like what?
She asked, feigning boredom. Untouchable. Her jaw tightened.
You don't know anything about me anymore. Nathan.
Maybe. I studied her, taking in the way her shoulders were stiff, the way she was too composed. Or maybe I know exactly why you're standing like that. Why you're gripping that folder so tight. Why you won't let yourself react. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. And for the briefest moment, just a flicker, something in her eyes cracked. Something raw. Familiar. Then, just as quickly, it was gone.
I have work to do.
She said finally, her voice sharp, final. And before I could say another word, she turned and walked out. I let her go. For now.
The door to the conference room clicked shut behind me, but I barely heard it. My heels struck the marble floors in quick, sharp steps as I walked toward my office, my pulse a relentless drum in my ears. Damn him. I shouldn't care. I shouldn't still feel anything. But the second Nathan had said my name, low, rough, the way he used to whisper it in the dark, it was like the past had shattered through the walls I spent years building. And now, the memories wouldn't stop. His hands, firm yet reverent, tracing the curve of my spine. His mouth, murmuring my name against my skin, lips trailing fire in their wake. The way his breath would hitch right before he lost control. I exhaled sharply, shoving the thoughts away as I reached my office. The past was just that. The past. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and leaned against it, pressing my palms flat against the cool wood. My reflection stared back at me from the floor-to-ceiling windows, my expression unreadable. Controlled. Exactly how I wanted to be. But no amount of control could stop the flashes that came next. Paris was supposed to be the beginning. We had spent 2 weeks wrapped in a dream, long mornings tangled in bed, stolen afternoons exploring the city, nights lost in whispered confessions and breathless moans. I had never felt more alive, more certain of anything in my life. I was in love with him. Hopelessly, recklessly in love. And he loved me too. I knew he did. The way he would pull me into his arms without a word, holding me like I was something precious. The way his lips would brush against my forehead in the quiet moments, when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way he whispered "I don't deserve you" against my skin, like a secret he was afraid to say out loud. But there had been cracks in the dream, hadn't there? Small at first. Barely noticeable. A phone call he wouldn't answer. A tension in his shoulders when he thought I wasn't looking. The way his eyes darkened when I talked about the future. Our future. You ever think about moving here? I had asked one night, curled against his chest, tracing lazy patterns on his skin. Or maybe London. We could go anywhere, really. He had gone still beneath me, his fingers ghosting over my back.
Anywhere, huh?
Anywhere, I had whispered, pressing a kiss to his jaw. As long as we're together. I didn't see it then. Didn't see the way his throat bobbed like he was swallowing something back. Didn't hear the way his breathing changed. But I saw it now. Nathan had never been planning a future with me. He had been planning his escape. I should have seen it coming. Looking back now, the signs were there. In the way Nathan's kisses grew more intense, almost desperate. In the way his hands lingered on my skin like he was trying to memorize every inch of me. In the way he looked at me, like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing he was about to fall. And even after all these years, even after I had rebuilt myself from the ashes he left behind, the memory still sliced through me like a blade. Because I hadn't just lost him that night. I had lost the version of myself who had believed love was enough.
She thought she had one. Charlotte sat across from me at the long, gleaming conference table, her posture perfect, her expression cool and detached. She had shut me out completely, deflected every carefully placed comment, dodged every unspoken challenge. But I knew her. And I knew she was lying to herself. Because the way she refused to meet my eyes for more than a few seconds, that wasn't indifference. The way she pressed her lips together every time I said her name, that wasn't composure. The way her breath hitched just barely when I leaned forward, that was memory. Still, she played her role perfectly. A CEO in her prime. An untouchable force. But I wasn't just any man sitting at this table. And she wasn't just any woman. I let a slow, deliberate silence stretch between us before speaking. I have a proposal. She barely blinked.
The contract terms are already being reviewed. There's nothing left to propose.
I smirked. Not about the contract. That got her attention. A flicker of something in those sharp blue eyes before she masked it. She exhaled, impatient.
Nathan.
Dinner. The single word landed between us, heavier than it should have been. She stilled. Just for a moment. A blink you'd miss it hesitation. But I didn't miss it. She set her pen down, tilting her head slightly.
Dinner?
To finalize the remaining details. I let my voice dip, just slightly, just enough to make it not about business. You said yourself there are still things to negotiate. She gave me a slow, measured look, as if she was debating whether or not I was worth her time. But I saw the way she gripped the armrest of her chair, the way her nails pressed against the leather. She was debating more than just dinner. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then,
No.
I grinned. No.
I don't mix business with.
She stopped herself, lips pressing together like she refused to let the rest of that sentence escape. I leaned back, letting my smirk widen. With what, Charlotte? Her eyes flashed.
With distractions.
I chuckled, shaking my head. Is that what I am now? A distraction? She stood abruptly, smoothing the front of her blazer, regaining control.
Ava will follow up on the outstanding points.
And just like that, she turned to leave. Again. But this time, I wasn't letting her off so easily. I'll be at the Sinclair at 8. She stopped mid-step. Didn't turn. Didn't acknowledge me. But I saw the way her shoulders lifted slightly, the way she took a slow, steadying breath before continuing out the door. I watched her go, my smirk never fading. She could fight it all she wanted. But she'd be there.
I shouldn't have come. I knew it the second I stepped into the Sinclair, the restaurant's soft golden lighting casting a glow over the tables, the low hum of conversation filling the space. I shouldn't have walked through those doors. I shouldn't have let curiosity, or something far more dangerous, win. But when I spotted Nathan, already seated, his jacket draped over the chair, his sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal the strong lines of his forearms, I knew exactly why I was here. It wasn't business. It never was. He looked up the moment the hostess led me to the table, his sharp hazel eyes locking onto mine with that same damn intensity that always made my breath catch. For a second, just a second, I hated that my body still responded. Nathan stood as I approached, his gaze flickering over me, taking in the fitted black dress, the way my hair framed my face, the heels that clicked softly against the marble floors.
You came.
I didn't want any loose ends in the contract, I said smoothly, ignoring the way my pulse betrayed me. Let's keep this professional. He smirked.
Of course.
Liar. I sat, and the moment I did, I felt it. The shift. The crackling heat beneath the surface, the tension stretching between us like an invisible thread, growing tighter with every passing second. We talked. At first, it was business. Safe, measured, a negotiation masked behind practiced words. But then the wine was poured. And then he leaned in just a little too close. And then his voice dropped, the way it used to when he whispered secrets against my skin.
I saw the press release last year.
He said, tracing the rim of his glass with his thumb.
Your deal with Kensington Tech. That was impressive.
I took a slow sip of my wine. I worked for it.
I never doubted that. You built everything you said you would.
His eyes lingered on mine. There was something about the way he said it. Not just admiration. Not just acknowledgement. Regret. I hated that it twisted something in my chest. I meant what I said before, Nathan. You don't know me anymore. His lips curved at the edges, but there was no humor in his expression.
And yet, I know you won't touch your wine glass until you've swirled it twice. I know that when you're frustrated, you press your nails against your palm like you're doing right now.
I froze. His voice dropped lower.
And I know that even though you came here pretending this is just a business dinner.
He leaned in slightly, his hazel eyes burning into mine.
You haven't stopped thinking about me any more than I've stopped thinking about you.
Something inside me snapped. I should have shut him down. Ended this conversation. But instead, why did you leave? The words slipped out before I could stop them. A muscle ticked in his jaw. For the first time that night, he hesitated. That was all the answer I needed. I exhaled sharply, pushing my chair back. This was a mistake.
Charlotte.
I stood, grabbing my clutch, forcing my pulse to steady. Good night, Nathan. And this time, I walked away first.
I couldn't let her walk away. Not again. Charlotte was halfway through the restaurant when I reached her, my hand catching her wrist just before she could push through the doors. She froze.
Let me go. Nathan.
Her voice was low, steady. But I could hear the sharp edge beneath it, the same edge she used when she was trying to hold herself together. I didn't loosen my grip. Not until you hear me out. She turned slowly, her blue eyes burning with something between anger and something deeper. Something she didn't want to name.
You don't get to do this.
She said, her voice controlled, but her chest rising and falling just a little too fast.
You don't get to look at me like that. You don't get to act like you.
Like I what? I stepped closer, my voice dropping. Like I never stopped thinking about you. Like leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. She swallowed hard, but her chin lifted.
You made your choice.
I let out a rough breath, raking a hand through my hair. No, Charlotte. My choice was taken from me. That made her pause. Just for a second. But I saw it. The small crack in the wall she had built so perfectly around herself. I exhaled, my voice quieter now. I never wanted to leave you. That night in Paris. I didn't walk away because I wanted to. I walked away because I had no choice. She crossed her arms, but she didn't look away.
What does that even mean?
I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to tell her, but because once I did, there would be no going back. I took a breath. My father. Her brows furrowed.
What?
The night before I left, he called me. I clenched my jaw at the memory, the cold voice on the other end of the line, the weight of something bigger than me crashing down like a tidal wave. He gave me a choice. Come back and take over Caldwell Industries, or watch as he tore it apart, piece by piece. Charlotte blinked, confusion flickering over her features.
Nathan, your father never wanted you to take over the company. You told me that yourself.
I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah. And then he realized I was his only option. I shook my head. He was drowning the company in debt, making reckless decisions. The board was turning on him. He needed someone to fix his mess. And when he found out I had other plans that didn't include him, he made it very clear what would happen if I didn't do exactly what he wanted. Her arms slowly lowered, her expression shifting from anger to something else. Something wary.
Why didn't you tell me?
I exhaled sharply. Because I knew you, Charlotte. I knew you would have told me to fight it, to let it all burn. But I couldn't. Too many people's jobs, their livelihoods. And I was 24. I didn't know how to fight him and still keep you. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Her lips parted, but she didn't say anything. I took a slow step closer. I never wanted to leave you. And if I could go back, if I could change anything. I exhaled. I would have found another way. But I swear to you, Charlotte, you were never a mistake. She held my gaze, her breathing uneven. And then...
I don't know what you expect me to do with that. Nathan.
Her voice wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was tired. Like she had spent too many nights trying to erase the ghost of me, and now I was standing here, bringing it all back to life. Before I could respond, she turned, stepping through the doors and out into the night. And this time, I was the one left standing there, watching her disappear.
I didn't go straight home. Instead, I found myself walking aimlessly through the quiet streets of Manhattan, the city lights casting long shadows, the hum of life around me fading into background noise. Nathan's words still echoed in my mind.
My choice was taken from me. I never wanted to leave you.
I let out a sharp breath, hugging my arms around myself as if that would keep the past from creeping in. But it was too late. Paris. Late nights in a tiny apartment that smelled like coffee and paint. Soft laughter tangled with whispered promises. The way he looked at me like I was the only future he ever wanted. And then... gone. No calls. No explanations. Just silence. I had spent years forcing myself to move on. Building something so strong, so impenetrable, that nothing, not even the ghost of Nathan Caldwell, could shake me. But tonight, he had cracked the foundation. I stopped walking, pressing my fingers to my temples. This is ridiculous. It doesn't change anything. The past was the past. And yet, I had spent years believing that he left because he didn't love me enough. That he chose his future over ours. That I had been replaceable. But if what he said was true, if he had been forced to leave, then everything I thought I knew was a lie. I swallowed hard, my heels clicking against the pavement as I turned the corner. My office building loomed ahead, its glass windows reflecting the city's golden glow. I hadn't planned to come here, but maybe it made sense. Work had always been my sanctuary. The one thing I could control. I stepped into the empty lobby, my heels muffled against the sleek marble floor as I rode the elevator up to my office. Inside, the contract with Caldwell Industries sat waiting on my desk. I picked it up, running my fingers along the crisp edges. This deal was everything I had worked for. A merger that would solidify my company's future. It was supposed to be straightforward. It was supposed to be simple. But nothing about Nathan had ever been simple. I sank into my chair, staring at the contract but seeing only his face.
You haven't stopped thinking about me any more than I've stopped thinking about you.
I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Tomorrow, I would sign this contract. Tomorrow, I would walk into that boardroom and prove, to him, to myself, that the past had no hold on me. But tonight, I wasn't so sure.
The city never really slept, but at this hour, long past midnight, it was quieter. I should have gone home. Instead, I was still in my office, the only light coming from the dim glow of my desk lamp and the panoramic skyline beyond the glass windows. The whiskey in my glass was untouched. My tie was loose, my jacket draped over the back of my chair. And my mind, still on her. Charlotte. The way she had looked at me tonight. Eyes blazing, lips pressed together like she was holding back words she wasn't ready to say. Was still imprinted in my mind. She was fighting it. Fighting me. And that only made me want her more. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. I had spent years convincing myself that she was part of my past, that leaving her was the only choice I had. But now that she was here, standing in front of me, fire in her eyes and steel in her spine, I knew the truth. I had never stopped wanting her. Never stopped needing her. And now, she was within reach. But she was also different. Stronger. Sharper. A woman who had built her own empire, who carried herself with a kind of effortless authority that commanded every room she entered. That same fire that once burned for me now fueled the walls she had built between us. But I had spent a lifetime navigating power plays and negotiations. And this tension humming between us wasn't so different. She wanted to pretend she was immune to me. That this was just business. That she could sit across from me, discuss contracts and legal terms, and not remember the way I used to whisper her name against her skin. She was wrong. And I was going to prove it. My phone buzzed on the desk, breaking through the silence. A message from Charlotte.
Ava will send the final terms in the morning. We'll sign by the end of the week.
Professional. Precise. As if she hadn't been standing in front of me hours ago, eyes flashing with emotion she didn't want to feel. I smirked. So this was how she wanted to play it. Fine. I could be patient. But not forever. I picked up my phone, my fingers moving over the screen. Understood. But business aside, we're not finished, Charlotte. Not even close. I hit send. And as I leaned back, waiting, I already knew. She wouldn't ignore it.
I should have walked away. I should have turned on my heel and left before this conversation spiraled into dangerous territory. But I didn't. I was still here. Standing too close to Nathan Caldwell in the dimly lit corner of my office, where the tension between us had grown thick enough to suffocate. The deal was almost done. It should have been over. But the way he was looking at me, like he saw past every defense I had built, straight into the part of me that still ached for him, told me nothing was over. Not even close. Nathan, I started, my voice steadier than I felt. This is a mistake. His lips curved into something between a smirk and a challenge.
Then walk away.
I inhaled sharply. He knew I wouldn't. He stepped closer. I should have stopped him. I should have. But the scent of his cologne, something dark and familiar, laced with memories I had spent years trying to forget, wrapped around me, pulling me deeper into a moment I wasn't ready for. I lifted my chin, refusing to back down, even as my pulse pounded in my throat. "This changes nothing," I whispered. His eyes flickered with something dangerous.
We'll see about that.
And then he kissed me. It wasn't careful. It wasn't hesitant. It was fire and hunger and something so raw that I felt the ground shift beneath me. His hand slid into my hair, tilting my head back as his lips claimed mine with a desperation that matched my own. A hunger that had been buried beneath years of silence and distance. I should have resisted. I didn't. Instead, I found myself gripping the front of his shirt, pulling him closer as the past and present collided in a single heartbeat. And for the first time in years, nothing else existed. Not the deal. Not the pain. Not the walls I had built so carefully. Just this. Just him.
I never thought kissing her again would feel like this. Like the years between us had never existed. Like the silence, the pain, the distance, none of it mattered. But it did. And that was the problem. Because the second her lips left mine, the second she took a breath and reality settled back between us, I saw it in her eyes. Doubt. She was already rebuilding the walls. And for the first time in my life, I realized I couldn't break them down for her. Not this time. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair as I stepped back, putting space between us before she did it first. Charlotte.
Don't.
She cut in, her voice barely above a whisper.
We can't do this.
I should have argued. I should have told her we already had, that pretending it hadn't happened wouldn't erase it. But instead, I just watched her. Watched the way she wrapped her arms around herself, like she could hold together whatever was unraveling inside her. And I knew. I knew that if I wanted her, truly wanted her, I had to stop trying to control how this ended. I had to give her something I never had before. A choice. So I forced myself to nod, to take a step back even when every muscle in my body ached to close the distance between us again. This is your call, I said, my voice lower than I intended. I won't push you, Charlotte. Not this time. Her breath hitched, and for a second, I thought she might say something, might stop me. But she didn't. She just stood there, her hands clenched at her sides, her expression unreadable. I turned toward the door, gripping the handle, but before I opened it, I glanced back over my shoulder. When you figure out what you want, you know where to find me. And then I walked away.
I should have felt relieved when he walked away. Instead, all I felt was unsteady. I sat down at my desk, pressing my fingers against my temples, willing the storm inside me to quiet. But it didn't. It only grew stronger. Nathan had always been a force of nature, pulling me in, leaving destruction in his wake, and now he was giving me the choice.
When you figure out what you want, you know where to find me.
Damn him. Because that was the problem. I didn't know what I wanted. My heart was still racing from the way he kissed me, my lips still tingling like they carried the memory of him. But my mind? My mind was stuck in the past. The nights I spent wondering why he left. The mornings I woke up hoping for answers that never came. The version of myself that I had to rebuild from the ground up when he shattered me. Could I really trust him again? Or was I setting myself up for the same pain all over again? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the city lights beyond my window, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. I had spent years learning how to be strong on my own. But suddenly, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be.
I wasn't a man who doubted himself. Not in business. Not in negotiations. Not in anything. But when it came to Charlotte, I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, a glass of whiskey in my hand, staring at the city lights stretching endlessly below. Normally, this view gave me clarity, a reminder of everything I'd built, every empire I had conquered. Tonight, it was nothing but noise. My mind was stuck in one place. One moment. One woman. Charlotte. The way she looked at me when I told her the truth. The way her breath hitched. The way I saw her mind racing, torn between the past and the present. I had spent years mastering the art of control. Knowing when to push, when to step back. Knowing how to manipulate a room, a deal, a competitor. But this wasn't a game, and she was the first real risk I had no control over. Because if she said no, if she walked away, I wouldn't just lose a contract. I would lose her. Again. And this time, it wouldn't be because I left. It would be because she chose to. I wouldn't chase her. I wouldn't force her hand. She had to choose me. I exhaled, setting the glass down harder than I intended. My reflection in the window was unreadable, but deep inside, I felt something unfamiliar. Vulnerability. I had walked away from her once, believing I was protecting her. But if she walked away now, it would be because she no longer wanted me. And that was a risk I didn't know if I was ready to take.
I couldn't keep running from this. For days, I had buried myself in work, in meetings, in anything that could keep my mind occupied. Anything that could drown out the echo of Nathan's words.
When you figure out what you want, you know where to find me.
But no amount of distraction could erase him. Not the way he looked at me when he told me the truth. Not the way his touch still lingered on my skin, no matter how much I tried to forget. Not the way my heart still ached for him, despite every reason it shouldn't. I stared at the contract on my desk, the numbers and legal jargon blurring together. This deal, my deal, should have been the only thing that mattered. The biggest moment of my career. But it wasn't. Not anymore. I could sign this contract, move forward, pretend nothing had changed. Or I could finally stop lying to myself. I pressed my palms flat against the desk, breathing deep, steadying myself. Then, before I could second-guess it, I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. Because I had made my decision. And I could only pray that I wasn't too late.
I had convinced myself I was prepared for any outcome. That if Charlotte walked away, I would accept it. That I would let her go, no matter how much it killed me. I was a liar. Because the moment my office door swung open and she stepped inside, breathless, eyes blazing with something I couldn't quite name yet, every rational thought evaporated. She was here. She had chosen to be here. Charlotte. I breathed, rising from my chair, my pulse pounding. She didn't waste time. She walked straight to my desk, planting her hands on the surface like she had done in that conference room days ago. But this time, there was no distance, no shield of professionalism between us.
I have a counteroffer.
She said, voice steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of emotion beneath it. I raised a brow, forcing myself to keep my expression neutral, even as my entire body tensed. Oh. And what exactly are you offering? She swallowed, her throat working. Then, soft, but sure, she said,
Us.
The air between us changed. Heavy. Charged. I stepped around the desk, closing the space between us. I could feel the heat of her body, the tension humming between us like a live wire. She watched me, guarded, waiting. But I wasn't going to let her shoulder all the weight of this decision alone. Not this time. I exhaled, slow and measured, my voice low and raw. I don't want to win if it means losing you again. Her breath caught. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, her fingers, tentative at first, reached for mine. I lifted her hand to my lips, pressing a slow, deliberate kiss against her fingers. Then, let's rewrite the terms. Charlotte. I murmured. Because this time, I wasn't letting her go.
The pen felt heavier in my hand than it should have. The contract, pages and pages of negotiations, legal terms, carefully structured deals, lay before me. A culmination of everything I had built, everything I had fought for. And yet, as I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper, signing my name with deliberate strokes, my heart wasn't pounding because of the deal. It was pounding because of the man standing across the desk, watching me. Nathan. His gaze never wavered, dark and unreadable, but I could feel the weight of it, like he was memorizing every movement, every breath. I set the pen down, my fingers lingering over my signature for a second longer than necessary. "It's done," I said, my voice steady, but inside, I was anything but. Nathan's lips curled into the faintest smirk as he picked up the contract, flipping through it as if he needed confirmation. As if he hadn't been waiting for this moment as much as I had.
"Looks like we have a deal, then."
His voice was smooth, controlled. But when his eyes lifted to mine, there was something else there. Something dangerous. Something inevitable. The air between us shifted. Because we both knew, this moment was never just about a contract. My pulse quickened as he stepped around the desk, closing the distance between us in slow, measured steps. I should walk away. I should thank him for the partnership, shake his hand, leave this office with my carefully constructed walls intact. But I didn't move. Because for the first time in years, I didn't want the walls. I wanted him. Nathan stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. Close enough that I could catch the faintest hint of his cologne, the scent that had haunted me for years. He reached out, fingers brushing along the sleeve of my dress, barely a touch, but my body reacted like it was a live wire. "You're staring," I whispered.
"So are you."
He murmured back. And then, before I could second guess, before I could stop myself, I reached for him. Nathan didn't hesitate. His hands were on my waist in an instant, pulling me to him, and then his mouth was on mine, firm, demanding, familiar. The past and present collided in that kiss. Years of longing, of unanswered questions, of words never spoken, it all unraveled, dissolved between us as his lips moved against mine. His hands slid up my back, fingers pressing into my skin as if he needed to prove to himself that I was real. That this was happening. I melted into him. Because, God help me, I had missed this. Missed the way he tasted. The way he made me feel, like I was the only thing that had ever mattered. I didn't know if this was our last kiss or the first of many. But as Nathan's hand tangled in my hair, his lips parting from mine only long enough to whisper my name like a prayer, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't ready to let go.
I had spent years believing that love and power couldn't exist in the same space. That wanting more. More success, more control, more influence meant there was no room for things like trust, like vulnerability, like Charlotte. But standing here, with her still in my arms, her lips swollen from my kiss, I realized how wrong I had been. She wasn't a distraction. She was the missing piece. She looked up at me, her breath still uneven, eyes searching mine as if trying to find the answer before I could say it.
"Are we doing this?"
She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was hesitation there. Fear, maybe. And I understood it. Because we had been here before, in a different city, in a different time, believing that love was enough to fight against the tides pulling us in opposite directions. Back then, we had lost. Back then, I had let us lose. I cupped her face, my thumb brushing lightly over her cheekbone. "We're doing this." No hesitation. No doubt. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wasn't expecting that answer. As if part of her had already prepared for me to push her away again. "Not this time, Charlotte," I said, my voice firm, steady. Success means nothing if you're not standing beside me. She blinked, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if she would say something, if she would pull away, if she would tell me that this was still a mistake. But then, she smiled. Not a small, hesitant smile. A real one. One I hadn't seen in years. And just like that, everything changed. Business and passion. Love and ambition. We didn't have to choose. We could have both. And as Charlotte pulled me in for another kiss, I knew. This time, we wouldn't lose.
A year ago, I never would have imagined this. If someone had told me that the same man who shattered my heart in Paris would be the one standing at the end of the aisle, waiting for me with eyes full of love and promise, I would have laughed. Maybe even scoffed. But life has a way of surprising you. And Nathan Caldwell? He had a way of proving me wrong in the best possible ways. The soft lace of my wedding dress brushes against the marble floor as I take a slow breath. Ava is beside me, adjusting my veil, grinning like she's more excited about this than I am.
Are you ready?
She asks, her voice full of mischief. I meet her gaze in the mirror and smile. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. Because this isn't a risk. It isn't a reckless leap into the unknown. It's us. The doors open, and the moment my eyes find his, everything else fades. The music, the crowd, the soft whispers. There's only Nathan. Standing at the altar, looking devastatingly handsome in his black tux, his expression completely unguarded. For once, the powerful, confident CEO isn't wearing his mask of control. For once, he's just a man. My man. And when I finally reach him, his fingers tighten around mine, grounding me. His voice is rough, low, just for me.
You're breathtaking.
A shiver runs down my spine. You're not so bad yourself. The ceremony is beautiful. Simple, intimate. Just like us. But it's the vows that truly undo me. Nathan, the man who once walked away from love to chase power, now stands before me, declaring to the world that I am the only thing he'll ever chase again. And when he slips the ring onto my finger, sealing the promise we rebuilt from the ashes of the past, I know. This time, forever is real. Hours later, as the party fades and the world belongs only to us, he pulls me close, his lips brushing against my ear.
Mrs. Caldwell.
He murmurs, testing the name on his tongue. A thrill runs through me. Say it again. He smirks, his voice dropping.
Mrs. Caldwell.
My heart pounds, a slow, delicious ache. I cup his face, my wedding ring catching the soft glow of the candlelight. I love you, Nathan. His hands tighten on my waist.
And I'll spend the rest of my life proving just how much I love you. Charlotte.
Then he kisses me. Slow, deep, like we have all the time in the world. And for the first time in forever, we really do.